It's just gold in a stone, Luna. She needed to feel secure. Alpha David's voice was smooth, a practiced calm that made the betrayal twist deeper. He stood by the roaring fireplace of the pack house, entirely unbothered that the heavy, silver-banded moonstone ring, the ancestral mark of the Silvercrest Luna, was no longer on Luna's finger. It was on hers. Alara, the mistress who currently cowered behind him, feigning a soft, delicate gasp. Luna didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stared at the pale mark left on her ring finger, the phantom weight of her birthright suddenly gone. "Secure," Luna repeated, the word tasting like ash. She looked from the man she had loved since childhood to the open mahogany doors. "I see." She turned her back on him, the silence of her departure louder than any shattered glass. She wouldn't fight for a title he had already cheapened. She would simply leave him to the ruin he had invited. The air in the Silvercrest pack house always smelled of pine and old money, a scent Luna had once found comforting. Tonight, it smelled like a tomb. She stood in the center of the grand foyer, her dark hair pulled back severely, accentuating the sharp angles of her face and the coldness in her hazel eyes. Her leather riding jacket felt tight across her shoulders. The conversation with David, just 10 minutes prior, echoed in her mind. He hadn't even looked ashamed. He had looked annoyed, as if her presence was an inconvenience to his new reality. "She's carrying my heir, Luna. The pack needs stability." The words were a calculated strike, designed to paralyze her. But Luna wasn't paralyzed. She was hollowed out. 10 years of loyalty, of fighting beside him to secure the borders, of managing the intricate politics of the northern packs. All erased because Alara, a soft-spoken Omega from a fractured southern territory, knew how to widen her eyes and tremble at the right moments. Luna moved toward the heavy oak front doors. The pack house was quiet, the usual hum of activity muted. The members of Silvercrest weren't stupid. They felt the shift in the air, the sudden, jagged tear in their leadership. They just didn't know the extent of the wound yet. "Luna," she paused, her hand hovering over the brass handle. It was Marcus, the beta, and David's closest friend. He stepped out of the shadows near the grand staircase, his usually jovial face lined with tension. He looked at her left hand. He already knew. "I am not Luna anymore, Marcus," she said, her voice eerily even. "You will need to address Alara if you need the estate managed." Marcus winced. David is an idiot. He's thinking with his... He's not thinking. Just give it time. The elders won't stand for this. They won't accept her. They won't have a choice. He gave her the ring. Luna finally turned to look at him. There was no anger in her expression, only a profound, freezing finality. The ring recognizes the Alpha's true intention. It hasn't rejected her, which means his heart is settled. "I won't stay to be a spectacle, Marcus, or a backup plan. Where will you go? The borders are unstable. The Deadlands. The Deadlands are none of my concern." She lied smoothly. "Tell David the ledgers are on his desk. The winter rations have been secured. I have left the pack in order." Before Marcus could offer another useless platitude, Luna pulled the heavy door open and stepped out into the biting chill of the autumn night. The stables were silent. She bypassed the elegant thoroughbreds David favored and went straight to the back stall. Midnight, a massive, ill-tempered black destrier, snorted and pawed the ground at her approach. They understood each other. She saddled him swiftly, her movements mechanical. She packed nothing but the clothes on her back, a hunting knife, and a small pouch of silver coins. Leaving quietly was the only way to retain any dignity. A scene would only feed Alara's victim narrative. As she led Midnight out into the courtyard, a low growl vibrated through the mist. She froze. The sound didn't come from a Silvercrest guard. It was deeper, resonating with a power that made the hairs on her arms stand up. From the tree line that bordered the estate, a massive shadow detached itself from the darkness. A wolf, twice the size of a normal timber wolf, with fur the color of crushed obsidian. Its eyes glowed a terrifying, unnatural crimson. A rogue. No, not a rogue. The sheer aura of dominance radiating from the beast suffocated the air. It was an alpha, but an alpha twisted by something ancient and violent. The wolf shifted, bones cracking and reforming in a grotesque ballet until a man stood in the clearing. He was impossibly tall, clad in dark, worn leathers that smelled of ozone and dried blood. His hair was long and unkempt, and his face was a harsh landscape of sharp jawlines and a cruel, mocking mouth. This was the king of the Deadlands, the Dark Alpha. The monster mothers used to frighten their pups. He didn't move toward her, merely stood blocking the main road out of the territory. Leaving so soon, little wolf? His voice was a gravelly rasp that seemed to echo inside her skull. The party is just getting started. Luna didn't back down. She gripped Midnight's reins tighter. You are trespassing on Silvercrest land, the man laughed, a sound devoid of any humor. Silvercrest land? From what I hear, Silvercrest doesn't even have a Luna to defend it. The Alpha traded his crown jewel for a piece of glass. Her jaw clenched. News travels fast in the gutter. His crimson eyes narrowed, a spark of dangerous amusement flaring within them. I am the gutter, sweetheart, and I've come to collect what David threw away. The standoff stretched, tense and brittle. Luna calculated the distance back to the pack house. If she shifted, she might make it to the alarm bell. But shifting took time, and the Dark Alpha King, Kale, whispered rumors called him, was already too close. I am not an object to be collected, Luna said, keeping her voice steady. She subtly shifted her weight, making sure her hunting knife was accessible. Kale tilted his head, studying her with predatory intensity. No, you're not. You're a strategic asset, a master tactician who knows the defensive weaknesses of every pack north of the dividing river. And right now, you are angry, displaced, and entirely unprotected. I don't need protection. Everyone needs protection, Luna. Even those who pretend they are made of iron. He took a slow step forward, the crunch of gravel impossibly loud. David is a fool. He thinks his new bedmate will secure his lineage, but he has destabilized his entire region. The surrounding packs will smell weakness. They will challenge him before the first snow. Luna knew he was right. It was the very argument she had tried to make to David before he presented Alara to the pack. But hearing it from the monster of the Deadlands was jarring. Why do you care what happens to Silvercrest? She asked, her grip on the reins white-knuckled. I don't, Kyle stated flatly. I care about the chaos it brings to my borders. The Deadlands are a sanctuary for the exiled, the broken, the violent. When the northern packs go to war, the collateral damage bleeds into my territory. I prefer my domain orderly. The irony of the most feared alpha in the continent demanding order was almost laughable. But Luna didn't smile. And how does taking me help you maintain order? You will give me the strategic advantage. With you by my side, I can anticipate the northern pack's movements. I can dictate the terms of their inevitable war. He stopped 10 paces from her. The smell of him, smoke, damp earth, and raw power, was intoxicating and terrifying. In exchange, I offer you asylum, my protection, and the opportunity to watch David's empire crumble from a very comfortable seat. It was a devil's bargain. The Deadlands were a death sentence for most. But going back inside the pack house, enduring the sympathetic stares, watching Alara parade around with the moonstone ring, that was a slower, more agonizing death. I won't be your prisoner, Luna declared. You will be a guest, Kyle countered smoothly. A highly valued advisor, free to leave whenever you wish, provided you don't take my secrets with you. Luna looked back at the imposing structure of the Silvercrest packhouse. A single light burned in the Alpha's office. David was probably already drafting the announcement of his new Luna. He had discarded 10 years of history with terrifying ease. She turned back to the Dark King. I ride my own horse. A slow, wicked smile spread across Kale's face, revealing slightly elongated canines. I wouldn't have it any other way. He gestured toward the dense forest that marked the border of the Deadlands. After you, little wolf. Luna mounted Midnight in one fluid motion. She didn't look back at the packhouse again. She spurred the destrier forward, moving past Kyle and into the suffocating darkness of the trees. She felt his gaze burning into her back, a heavy, possessive heat that was entirely different from David's familiar dismissal. The journey into the Deadlands was brutal. The air grew colder, the trees twisting into unnatural shapes, their branches clawing at the sky. There were no marked trails, only a treacherous path that Kale navigated with an unsettling ease, running alongside her horse in his human form, never tiring. They rode in silence for hours. Luna's mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of what she had just done. She had defected. She was riding with the enemy. You're awfully quiet, Kyle remarked as the first hint of gray dawn began to bleed into the sky. I'm considering my options. You don't have many. He stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. Midnight balked, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Luna reached for her knife. 3 wolves detached themselves from the surrounding brush. They were mangy, their eyes wild and desperate. Rogues. They didn't have the size or the aura of Kyle, but they were hungry, and they outnumbered them. Stay on the horse, Kyle ordered, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the monstrous gravel she had heard earlier. He didn't bother to shift. He simply moved. It was a blur of violence. He intercepted the lead wolf mid-leap, his hand wrapping around its throat with a sickening crunch. He threw the lifeless body into the trees before the other 2 even registered what had happened. The remaining rogues hesitated, fear finally piercing their hunger. Kyle's eyes bled to that terrifying crimson. He let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated the very ground beneath them. The rogues whimpered, tucked their tails, and fled back into the shadows. Kyle wiped a smear of blood from his jaw, looking back at Luna with an unnerving calm. The Deadlands are not for the faint of heart. I am not faint of heart, Luna replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. He held her gaze for a long moment, the bloody dawn casting harsh shadows across his face. No, he murmured, almost to himself. I don't believe you are. The Deadlands did not match the horrific fireside tales spun in the northern packs. There were no rivers of blood, nor fields of scattered bones. Instead, as the meager dawn finally broke through the dense canopy, Luna found herself staring at a landscape of brutal, untamed majesty. Huge, sheer cliffs of dark stone rose toward a slate-gray sky, and nestled within the natural curvature of the mountains was Kale's stronghold. It was a fortress carved directly into the living rock. There were no gilded gates or manicured rose gardens like those at Silvercrest. The Obsidian Citadel, as the Northern elders called it in whispers, was built for survival and defense. Heavy iron portcullises hung above the main thoroughfare, and sentries paced the high walls, their silhouettes sharp against the waking sun. Expecting a pile of skulls? Kyle's raspy voice broke her concentration. He was walking beside her horse, his breathing perfectly steady despite having run through the night. I was expecting less architecture, Luna admitted, keeping her tone neutral. It is highly defensible. A natural bottleneck at the entrance, high ground advantage on all flanks. Impressive. Kale cast a sideways glance at her, the crimson hue in his eyes having faded to a striking, icy amber in the daylight. A compliment from the Silvercrest tactician. I should mark the occasion. As they crossed the threshold into the courtyard, the atmosphere shifted. Luna expected chaos from a territory supposedly filled with rogues and criminals. What she found was chilling absolute order. Wolves in human form paused their tasks to watch them pass. There was no whispering, no open hostility, but rather a profound, deferential silence. They bowed their heads, not out of fear, but a deep-seated respect. It was a stark contrast to the performative loyalty David commanded. Kale stopped at the base of the massive stone steps leading into the main keep. He offered a hand to help her dismount. Luna hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it. His skin was rough, calloused from battle, and unnervingly warm. He didn't pull her down. He merely provided the anchor she needed to slide off Midnight's back smoothly. "Nix," Kale commanded, not raising his voice. From the shadows of the arched doorway emerged a woman. She was tall, built with the corded muscle of a seasoned fighter, her dark hair shaved close on one side. A jagged scar ran from her temple to her jaw. She looked at Luna with open calculation. "Take her horse to the stables, ensure it is fed, then prepare the western suite," Kyle instructed. Nix raised an eyebrow, her gaze lingering on Luna's fine leather riding habit, which was now dusted with ash and mud. "The western suite, Alpha? That's for dignitaries." "She is a dignitary," Kyle replied, his tone brooking no argument. "She is my guest. Anyone who forgets that will answer to me." Nix gave a sharp nod. "Understood." She took Midnight's reins, offering Luna a curt, assessing nod before leading the massive beast away. "She doesn't trust me," Luna observed quietly. "Nix doesn't trust anyone. It keeps her alive," Kale said, turning to walk up the steps. "Come, you need rest. The real work begins tonight." The interior of the citadel was warmed by massive hearths, the air smelling of wood smoke and roasting meat. Kyle led her up a winding stone staircase to a heavy oak door. Inside, the western suite was austere but comfortable. Thick furs covered a large bed, and a fire already crackled in the grate. A wide window offered a sweeping, dizzying view of the treacherous forest they had just traversed. "I will have someone bring you hot water and fresh clothes," Kale said, pausing in the doorway. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You're safe here, Luna. From David, from the politics, from all of it." "Nobody is ever safe from politics, Kale," she replied softly, stepping toward the fire to chase away the bone-deep chill of the ride. He offered a ghost of a smile. "Rest. We dine at sunset." When the door clicked shut, the silence of the room crashed down upon her. For the first time in 24 hours, Luna was entirely alone. She looked down at her left hand. The pale band of skin where the moonstone ring used to sit seemed to mock her. The betrayal finally clawed its way up her throat, tight and suffocating. But but she refused to cry. Tears were a luxury she could no longer afford. She was in the heart of the enemy's territory, and she needed her mind sharp. Morning at Silvercrest was usually a symphony of orchestrated activity. Today, the music was horribly off-key. David sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table, a half-empty cup of dark coffee in front of him. To his immediate right sat Alara. She was wearing a silk morning gown that looked beautiful, but entirely impractical for the brisk autumn chill of the north. More noticeably, the heavy silver and moonstone ring hung loosely on her delicate finger, looking heavy and absurdly out of place. "It just feels a little big, David," Alara murmured, twisting the ancient metal. "Perhaps we could have the blacksmith resize it." David stared at the ring. A strange flicker of unease curled in his gut. The ring had never needed resizing for Luna. It had settled onto her hand the day they mated, as if forged for her very bones. "No," he said, his voice sharper than intended. "You do not alter the ancestral ring. You will grow into it." Alara shrank back slightly, her lower lip trembling. "Of course, I'm sorry." Before David could offer a placating touch, the heavy dining room doors flew open. Marcus, the beta, strode in. His face was a mask of poorly contained panic. He didn't even acknowledge Alara, which made the young Omega bristle defensively. "David, we have a situation," Marcus said, his voice tight. "Can it not wait until after breakfast, Marcus?" David sighed, rubbing his temples. "No, Alpha, it cannot." Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice, though the tension in the room made every word ring out. "Luna is gone." David frowned. "She threw a tantrum last night. She's likely sulking in the summer house on the eastern border. Give her a day or two. She knows her duty. She will come back and accept her new role." Marcus slammed a hand on the table, making the silverware rattle. Alara gasped. "She isn't at the summer house, David. I checked her quarters. Her riding leathers are gone, her hunting knives are gone, and Midnight is missing from the stables." David's arrogance finally faltered. Luna never rode Midnight for leisure. The Black Destrier was a war horse, trained for endurance and battle. "Send a tracking party," he commanded, standing up, the chair scraping loudly against the wood floor. "Find her and bring her back. She cannot wander the territory unprotected." "I already sent the trackers at first light," Marcus replied grimly. "They found her scent trail. And she didn't stay in the territory. She rode straight through the northern pass." Marcus swallowed hard, looking genuinely terrified. "She crossed the dividing river, David. She rode into the Deadlands." The dining room plunged into absolute silence. Alara let out a small, confused sound. "The Deadlands? But isn't that where the monsters are?" David ignored her, his mind racing. Luna was pragmatic. She was calculated. She wouldn't just commit suicide by riding into the territory of the Dark King. Unless... "The trackers found something else," Marcus continued, pulling a piece of heavy parchment from his jacket. He unrolled it to reveal a charcoal rubbing taken from the mud near the border. It was a paw print, but it was impossibly massive, dwarfing any timber wolf in the northern hemisphere. "That was found directly next to Midnight's hoofprints," Marcus said softly. "The tracks walked side by side. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood." David stared at the charcoal drawing, the blood draining from his face. "Kale." "The Dark Alpha King came to our borders," Marcus confirmed. "And our Luna left with him." "She is not your Luna anymore," Alara shrilled, finally finding her voice, her hand covering the heavy ring. Both men ignored her. David gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. It was impossible. Luna hated the lawlessness of the Deadlands. She had spent years fortifying the borders against Kale's influence. Why would she go with him? He took her, David decided aloud, the delusion taking hold rapidly. He saw an opportunity while our guard was down, and he abducted her for leverage. David, Marcus warned, his voice low. The tracks, they walked together. I said he abducted her. David roared, his alpha aura flaring, forcing Marcus to bare his neck slightly in submission. Assemble the War Council. Send ravens to the eastern and western packs. Tell them the Dark King has breached our borders and stolen a high-ranking pack member. If Kyle wants a war, I will bring fire to his very doorstep. As David stormed out of the room, Marcus lingered behind. He looked at Alara, who was staring at the doorway with wide, frightened eyes, entirely out of her depth. Marcus shook his head slowly. David was blind. Luna hadn't been stolen. She had exacted the most flawless, devastating revenge possible without shedding a single drop of blood. The sun dipped below the jagged peaks of the Deadlands, casting long, bloody shadows across the courtyard of the Obsidian Citadel. True to his word, Kyle summoned Luna as the evening bells tolled. A young, silent Omega brought her fresh clothes, dark, supple leathers that fit perfectly, woven with a fine, silver thread that glinted in the firelight. It was armor, disguised as attire. Luna tied her dark hair back into a tight braid and followed her escort through the winding stone corridors. She was led to a massive circular room deep within the keep. A massive iron chandelier hung from the ceiling, illuminating a large stone table covered in intricate, hand-drawn maps of the continent. Kale stood at the head of the table. He had traded his travel-worn clothes for a dark tunic and heavy boots, looking every inch the brutal monarch of rumors. Standing around the table were 5 others, including Nyx. They were a terrifying assortment of scarred, hardened warriors. The air in the room was thick with tension and the smell of old leather and damp earth. The conversation halted the moment Luna stepped across the threshold. 5 pairs of predatory eyes locked onto her. She didn't flinch. She kept her chin high, her posture immaculate, projecting the absolute authority she had wielded for a decade. "You're late," Kyle noted, his tone flat, though his amber eyes held a flicker of amusement. "I was assessing the northern view from my window," Luna replied smoothly, walking toward the empty space at the table directly to Kale's right. "Your archers on the western tower leave a blind spot during the shift change at twilight." A low murmur rippled through the gathered commanders. Nyx bristled, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. "We did not invite a Silvercrest spy into our war room to critique our defenses." "Enough, Nyx," Kale ordered gently. The room instantly fell silent. He gestured to the maps. "We are discussing the winter raids. The eastern packs are hoarding grain near the dividing river. I intend to secure it before the snow locks the passes." Luna looked down at the map. It was incredibly detailed, showing topographies she thought only Silvercrest possessed. Kyle had placed a series of wooden markers along a valley known as the Weeping Pass. "You plan to march an army through the Weeping Pass?" she asked, looking up at Kyle. "It is the most direct route to the grain silos." A massive, heavily bearded man across the table grunted. "We hit them fast, take the grain, and retreat into the mountains." Luna studied the map for a long moment. The silence stretched. She could feel Kale watching her, testing her. This was the bargain. Her mind for his protection. "If you march your vanguard through the Weeping Pass," Luna said slowly, her finger tracing a secondary line on the parchment. "You will all be slaughtered." Outrage erupted. The bearded man slammed his fist on the table. "You insolent!" Kyle raised a single finger, and the silence returned, sharper than a blade. He leaned over the table, his face mere inches from Luna's. The heat radiating from him was intense, carrying the intoxicating scent of petrichor and raw power. "Explain." Luna didn't back away. She met his gaze evenly. "You are relying on intelligence that is 3 months old. David negotiated a covert treaty with the Eastern Alpha in late summer. In exchange for lumber, Silvercrest provided engineers to help dam the river above the pass." She tapped a specific point on the map. "They built a reservoir. If you march an army into that valley, they won't fight you. They will simply break the dam and drown your entire force." The commander stared at her, stunned. Nix looked at Kyle, waiting for his reaction. Kyle stared at the map and then back at Luna. A slow, terrifyingly beautiful smile spread across his harsh features. It completely transformed him, erasing the monster and revealing the brilliant, dangerous king beneath. "A trap," Kyle murmured, his eyes locked on hers. "A very clever, very deadly trap. David is arrogant, but he is not stupid," Luna said, ignoring the way her pulse jumped at Kale's proximity. "He likes to let the environment do his killing." Kale straightened up, looking at his commanders. "Recall the scouts. We strike through the jagged ridge instead. It will take 2 days longer, but we will take them from behind." He looked back at Luna, the respect in his gaze undeniable and heavy. "You just saved the lives of 400 of my men, Luna. I am merely paying for my room and board, Kale," she replied softly. "Oh, little wolf," Kale said, his voice dropping to a gravelly purr that sent a shiver down her spine. "You are going to cost them so much more than that." The obsidian citadel did not sleep. It merely quieted. For the next 2 weeks, Luna immersed herself in the rhythm of the Deadlands. She mapped their supply lines, audited their meager grain stores, and observed the brutal, highly efficient training regimens in the lower courtyards. She earned her keep with ruthless precision, her mind working relentlessly to hold the encroaching memories of Silvercrest at bay. It was a crisp, biting afternoon when Kale finally sought her out. Luna was standing on a stone balcony overlooking the sparring rings. Below, Nix was dismantling 3 male warriors with terrifying, fluid grace. You watch them as if you are calculating their breaking points. Kyle's voice drifted over the scrape of distant steel. He stepped onto the balcony, the freezing wind entirely failing to disturb his dark, heavy cloak. Luna didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the dust blooming in the ring below. I am calculating their stamina. Your warriors fight with anger, Kale. It makes them explosive, but it also makes them blind to attrition. In a prolonged siege, the northern armies would simply outlast them. Kyle leaned against the stone balustrade beside her. The heat radiating from his large frame was an instant, startling contrast to the icy air. And how would the brilliant tactician fix this? Discipline over fury, Luna replied, finally looking at him. His amber eyes were alight with that familiar, dangerous amusement. You need to teach them to hold the line, not just break it. Perhaps you should show them. Luna raised an eyebrow. I am a strategist, not a gladiator. You are a wolf who has not shifted or stretched her muscles since she crossed my borders. Kale countered smoothly, turning his body toward hers. He was so close that she could see the faint, silvery scars tracing the edge of his jawline. Your mind is sharp, Luna, but your spirit is pacing in a cage. Come. He didn't wait for her consent. Kyle walked away, leaving her with a distinct, irritating feeling of being issued a challenge she could not refuse. Down in the training ring, the warriors cleared out rapidly as their king stepped onto the packed earth. Luna followed, dropping her heavy outer coat on a wooden bench. She wore a fitted dark tunic and leather trousers, allowing for maximum mobility. Kale stood in the center of the ring, tossing a pair of blunted wooden sparring swords to the dirt. He didn't shift into his wolf form. This was a test of human skill. No alpha aura, Kale promised, his voice carrying easily over the sudden hush of the gathered onlookers. Just steel and instinct. Luna picked up one of the wooden blades. The weight was perfect. She tested the balance, her eyes locked on Kale. First to yield? First to bleed, he corrected with a wicked grin. He lunged. The sheer speed of his massive frame was startling, but Luna had spent a decade anticipating larger opponents. She pivoted sharply, letting his momentum carry him past her, and brought her blade up in a harsh, glancing strike against his ribs. Kale grunted, spinning instantly to block her follow-up strike. The sound of cracking wood echoed off the high stone walls. He was immensely powerful, every strike heavy enough to numb her forearms. But Luna was a dancer of violence. She ducked, wove, and deflected, using his own aggressive forward motion against him. For 10 minutes, they traded devastating blows. The cold air burned in her lungs. Sweat beaded on Kale's forehead. He wasn't holding back, and the realization sent a thrill of pure, unadulterated adrenaline through her veins. He respected her enough to try and break her guard. With a sudden, fainting strike, Kyle hooked his boot behind her ankle. Luna stumbled backward, but instead of falling, she dropped to one knee, sweeping her wooden blade upward. It stopped a fraction of an inch from the underside of Kyle's jaw. Simultaneously, the heavy tip of his sword rested dead center against her chest. They froze, chests heaving, their eyes locked in a ferocious, silent exchange. The air between them crackled with an electric, breathless tension. Kale slowly lowered his sword. He didn't step back. Instead, he reached down, offering his hand. Luna looked at his rough palm, then placed her hand in his. As he pulled her to her feet, his thumb brushed deliberately over the pale, bare skin of her ring finger. The touch sent a shockwave straight to her core. "You fight like someone who has nothing left to lose," Kale murmured, his voice a low gravel meant only for her ears. "I fight like someone who plans to win," Luna corrected softly, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Kyle's amber eyes darkened to the color of burnt honey. He didn't let go of her hand. Good, because the war hasn't even begun. The grand meeting hall of Silvercrest was stifling. David paced the length of the polished oak floor, his boots echoing sharply against the heavy silence. Sitting at the long council table were the emissaries from the eastern and western packs. They looked thoroughly unimpressed. "Let me be clear," David said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "The Dark King breached the dividing river. He abducted my Luna. This is an act of war, and treaties dictate that the Northern Coalition stands together." Lord Vance, the gray-haired emissary from the west, took a slow sip of his tea. "With all due respect, Alpha David, the intelligence we received tells a rather different story." David stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "What intelligence?" "The trackers," Vance replied, setting his teacup down with a delicate clink. "Rumors have a way of bleeding out of your borders. They say there was no struggle, no blood. The tracks indicated they walked side by side, willingly. Lies planted by Kale to divide us, David roared, slamming his fist onto the table. In the corner of the room, Ilara flinched violently. She was seated in a high-backed chair that dwarfed her, wearing a stunning silver gown that seemed entirely too formal for a morning council. The ancient moonstone ring slid precariously up and down her finger as she wrung her hands. "David, please," Ilara whispered, trying to offer a soothing smile. "Perhaps we should calmly discuss—" "Not now, Ilara," David snapped, barely glancing at her. The emissaries exchanged a loaded look. The blatant disrespect shown to the woman wearing the Luna ring was not lost on them. Luna had commanded the room with a mere shift of her posture. This girl shrank into the upholstery at the first sign of raised voices. Alpha David, the Eastern emissary, a sharp-eyed woman named Torin, spoke up. "We are not sending our soldiers to die in the frozen passes of the Deadlands to retrieve a woman who chose to leave. Your domestic disputes are your own. She is a strategic asset," David argued, desperation creeping into his voice. "She knows the blueprints to every fortress north of the river. If Kale extracts that information from her, we are all exposed." "If she was such a vital asset," Vance noted dryly, standing up to adjust his heavy woolen cloak. "You should not have given her ancestral ring to your mistress in the foyer of your pack house." The silence that followed was suffocating. David's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "The coalition will not march on the Deadlands," Torin finalized, also rising from her seat. "Secure your own borders, Alpha David. We will be fortifying ours. Good day." As the emissary swept out of the room, David collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. His empire was fracturing. He had expected outrage, solidarity, a righteous march to reclaim his stolen property. Instead, he was facing isolation and a profound, humiliating rejection. Ilara slowly approached him, reaching out to touch his shoulder. "David, we don't need them. We have each other. We can build our own legacy." David looked up at her. For the first time, the soft, wide-eyed innocence that had so thoroughly captivated him merely looked foolish. He looked at the heavy silver ring on her delicate hand. It looked like a shackle. "Get out," he whispered. Ilara blinked, tears welling instantly. "What?" "I said get out," he shouted, his alpha aura flaring so violently that the glass panes in the windows rattled. Ilara sobbed, hiking up her heavy skirts, and ran from the room. Marcus, who had stood silently by the door the entire time, let out a long, slow breath. He stepped forward. "Alpha, the pack is restless. The elders are demanding a formal explanation. Tell them nothing," David commanded bitterly. "Tell the border guards to double their patrols. If Kale steps 1 foot out of the Deadlands, I want his head on a pike." Marcus gave a stiff bow and turned to leave. As he walked down the dimly lit hallway, his mind raced. David was descending into madness, fueled by pride and a fatal miscalculation. Silvercrest would not survive the winter if this continued. Marcus ducked into his private study and locked the door. He walked over to his desk, pulling out a small piece of uncrested parchment. He dipped a quill in ink and began to write, his hand trembling slightly. It was treason. The penalty was death. But if he wanted to save the pack, he had only one choice. He had to contact the true Luna. A fierce storm battered the obsidian citadel, hurling sleet and freezing rain against the heavy glass windows. Deep inside the keep, in Kale's private war room, a massive fire roared in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the stone walls. Luna sat in a leather wingback chair, staring into the flames. A glass of dark, spiced wine rested untouched in her hand. Kael sat across from her, his long legs stretched out toward the heat, idly turning a silver coin between his long fingers. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was heavy with unspoken things, a thick, magnetic pull that had been growing since their bout in the training ring. "You look troubled, little wolf," Kyle observed, his raspy voice breaking the quiet. "I am merely thinking about the snowpack." Luna lied smoothly. "If the passes freeze early, your supply lines to the western outpost will be cut off." Kyle let out a soft chuckle. Always the tactician. Never a moment to just exist. He tossed the coin onto a small wooden table, leaning forward. "Stop worrying about my outposts, Luna. Tell me what is actually clawing at your mind." Luna finally looked away from the fire, meeting his intense, amber gaze. The light caught the sharp angles of his face, making him look at once terrifyingly beautiful and undeniably lethal. "I am thinking about the fact that I am sitting in the lair of the enemy, drinking his wine, and I feel more at peace than I have in 3 years. Kyle's eyes darkened. The distance between their chairs suddenly felt incredibly small. "Perhaps I am not the enemy. You are the monster of the Deadlands," she challenged softly, though there was no heat in her words. "And you are the Ice Queen of Silvercrest," he countered, his voice dropping to a gravelly purr. "Titles given by cowards who fear what they cannot control." He stood up, moving slowly until he was standing directly in front of her. He reached down, taking the untouched wine glass from her hand and setting it aside. He offered his hands. Luna hesitated for a fraction of a second before placing hers in his. He pulled her up, his grip firm but surprisingly gentle. She was tall, but she still had to tilt her head back to look him in the eyes. "I was exiled, Luna," Kale said quietly, revealing a piece of his past for the very first time. "Not because I was a monster, but because my father's bloodline was older, stronger than the current council. They feared a true king would unite the wild packs and strip them of their comfortable bureaucratic power. So they labeled me a rogue and drove me to the wastelands." Luna stared at him, the pieces suddenly falling into place. The discipline of his armies. The tactical brilliance. He wasn't a savage. He was a usurped monarch biding his time. "You don't want to destroy the northern packs," she realized, her breath hitching slightly as his hands moved from her palms to rest on her waist. "You want to reclaim them. I want to rebuild them," Kyle corrected, his thumb brushing against the heavy leather of her tunic. "But I cannot do it alone. I need someone who understands their laws, their weaknesses. Someone who knows how to hold an empire together once it is taken." He was looking at her lips. The air was practically humming with tension. Luna felt a heat pooling low in her stomach, a fierce, undeniable pull toward the dark power he radiated. "Are you asking me to be your architect, Kyle?" she whispered. "I am asking you to be my equal," he replied, his face lowering toward hers. Before the distance could be closed, a heavy knock echoed through the heavy oak doors. Kale stopped, his jaw tightening in frustration. He didn't step back, keeping his hands on her waist for one rebellious second longer before turning toward the door. "Enter," he barked. Nyx stepped into the room, her clothes soaked from the storm. She looked between the two of them, her sharp eyes missing nothing, but her expression remained carefully neutral. Alpha. A messenger was caught at the eastern border. He carried no weapons, only a sealed letter. "Burn it," Kale ordered dismissively. "I have no interest in David's desperate threats." "It is not from Alpha David," Nyx corrected, holding out a small, damp roll of parchment. And it is not addressed to you. Nyx walked forward and offered the parchment directly to Luna. Luna frowned, taking the letter. She recognized the wax seal immediately, even though it was pressed without a crest to avoid detection. It was a precise, perfectly round drop of black wax. "It's from Marcus," Luna said softly, breaking the seal. Kyle crossed his arms, his aura flaring slightly with possessive irritation. What does the beta of Silvercrest want with my guest? Luna unrolled the parchment. Her eyes scanned the hurried, cramped handwriting. As she read, the warmth from the fire seemed to vanish, replaced by a cold, harsh reality. She looked up at Kyle, her expression hardening back into the impenetrable mask of a leader. David has lost control of the council. The coalition has abandoned him, Luna said, her voice devoid of emotion. She gripped the parchment tightly. Marcus is begging me to return. He wants me to stage a coup and take the pack from David before the winter destroys them. The parchment trembled ever so slightly in Luna's hands. The firelight dancing in Kale's private study seemed to dim against the cold, hard reality of Marcus's desperate plea. Silvercrest was dying. The pack she had bled for, negotiated for, and sacrificed her youth to protect was unraveling under David's frantic, ego-driven mismanagement. "He wants you back," Kale stated, the low rumble of his voice breaking the heavy silence. He had stepped away from the window and was now standing dangerously close. The possessive edge to his aura was no longer a subtle hum. It was a physical weight pressing against the stone walls. He wants his brilliant architect to return and shore up the crumbling foundations of a house that threw her out in the cold. Luna didn't look up immediately. She traced the cramped ink of the beta's handwriting. "The elders demand a deposition. David is erratic. The eastern borders are entirely exposed. Come back, Luna. Take the pack." "Marcus does not want me to save David," Luna corrected softly, her voice remarkably steady. "He wants me to overthrow him, to use the elders' panic to strip David of his title and claim the alpha seat myself." Kale's amber eyes narrowed, studying her profile with intense, burning scrutiny. "And will you?" Luna finally turned her head, meeting the gaze of the Dark King. The distance between them was practically non-existent now. She could feel the ambient heat of his large frame, could smell the sharp, intoxicating scent of pine, wood smoke, and raw, untamed power. For a decade, she had defined herself by her usefulness to another man. She had been the shield, the diplomat, the silent force behind the throne. She looked down at the parchment. With a slow, deliberate motion, she turned and tossed it directly into the roaring hearth. The flames eagerly devoured the dry paper, curling the edges until Marcus's desperate treason was reduced to gray ash. "I have no interest in ruling the ashes of David's mistakes," Luna said, the conviction in her tone ringing like struck silver. She stepped fully into Kyle's space, tilting her head up to hold his gaze. "Silvercrest chose their path the night they let me walk out of the foyer without a word of protest. I am not a bandage to be applied when they begin to bleed." Kale's breath hitched, a minute betrayal of his iron control. His large hands came up, hovering for a fraction of a second before settling firmly on her waist. "Then what are you, little wolf?" he asked, his voice a ragged whisper that sent a thrill of pure adrenaline straight down her spine. "I am an architect," Luna replied, lifting her hands to rest them flat against the solid, heavily muscled expanse of his chest. "But I don't want to repair a broken system, Kale. I want to build a new one. With you." Kale let out a sound that was half growl, half groan. He didn't hesitate anymore. His mouth crashed down on hers, fierce and consuming. There was nothing tentative about the kiss. It was a collision of equals, a desperate, fiery confirmation of the magnetic pull that had been drawing them together since the forest edge. Luna kissed him back with equal ferocity, her hands sliding up to tangle in his dark, heavy hair. It felt like standing at the center of a storm and finally realizing she was the lightning. When he finally pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, they were both breathing heavily. "We ride at first light," Cale promised, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "Not to wage war, to answer the door." 3 days later, the first heavy snow of the season began to fall over the northern territories. It coated the sprawling, manicured lawns of the Silvercrest estate in a layer of pristine white. The heavy iron gates of the packhouse were firmly shut, but the guards on the watchtowers were completely silent. They did not raise the alarm. They did not draw their bows. They merely watched in awe as the vanguard of the obsidian citadel emerged from the tree line. There were no war cries. There was only the terrifying, disciplined crunch of hundreds of boots marching in perfect unison. At the head of the massive column rode Luna on her black destrier, wearing the dark, silver-threaded leathers of a queen. Beside her walked Cale in his wolf form, a beast of impossible, nightmarish proportions, his crimson eyes scanning the estate. Marcus stood alone in the center of the courtyard. As Luna brought midnight to a halt before the gates, the beta gave a slow, deep bow, signaling the guards to turn the heavy iron cranks. The gates of Silvercrest opened willingly for the Dark King. The sound of the gates grinding open finally drew David from his office. He burst through the mahogany doors of the packhouse, his face a mottled mask of panic and rage. Elara trailed behind him, clutching a thick shawl, her eyes wide with terror. "Treason!" David screamed, his alpha aura flaring desperately. It washed over the courtyard, but it was weak, frantic, and completely ineffective against the suffocating, ancient dominance radiating from Kyle. "Guards, seize them. Seize Marcus." Nobody moved. The Silvercrest warriors stood entirely still, their eyes fixed firmly on the ground. Cale shifted, the massive wolf dissolving into the towering, dark-clad monarch in the blink of an eye. He didn't even look at David. He offered his hand to Luna, helping her dismount with terrifying grace. "They won't answer to you, David," Luna said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the frozen courtyard. She walked forward, Cale a silent, lethal shadow at her shoulder. "Because you forgot the most basic rule of leadership. A pack does not follow a title. They follow strength. They follow loyalty." David backed up a step, his chest heaving as he looked at the sheer size of Cale's army, and then at the cold, untouchable woman he had foolishly discarded. "Luna, please. We can negotiate. We can fix this." "There is nothing to fix," Luna replied coldly. "You are hereby stripped of your alpha status by the combined lack of confidence of your elders and the surrender of your beta. You have until nightfall to gather your personal belongings and leave these lands." Elara let out a muffled sob. With a trembling hand, she pulled the heavy, oversized moonstone ring off her finger and dropped it onto the snow-covered cobblestones. It landed with a dull, hollow clink. Luna didn't even glance at the ancestral jewelry. She didn't need a ring to command a room, and she certainly didn't want the tainted legacy it now carried. She looked up at Kyle, who offered her a devastatingly proud smile. The North belonged to them now. The winter brought no bloodshed to the northern packs. Only a profound, silent revolution, united under a king who truly understood the burden of power, and a queen who possessed the tactical brilliance to sustain it. The region entered an era of unprecedented strength and prosperity. The ancestral moonstone ring lay forever forgotten in the deepest vaults of Silvercrest, a dusty relic of a weak man's folly. In its place, an empire was forged not of silver and glass, but of mutual respect, tactical genius, and an unbreakable, fierce loyalty that the history books would remember for centuries. If you found yourself captivated by Luna's journey of betrayal, empowerment, and unexpected romance, please leave a like, share this story with your fellow readers, and subscribe for more thrilling, dramatic tales.